Good evening, everyone. We're glad you could join us tonight for our continuing study this summer of a series called The Heart of the Matter. We're looking at various attitudes that the Bible encourages us to have toward various elements of life. This is lesson 14, and tonight we'll be looking at the Christian's attitude toward material things. Our attitude toward material things. So in your notes, you see there, I'd like to begin with a quote from a book by Richard Foster called Money, Sex, and Power. This particular quote has to do specifically with money, but we're going to be expanding our view of material things tonight beyond just simply a medium of exchange. But within this particular quotation, I think we can see some perspectives on material things that are quite dangerous to us and militate against our spiritual outlook in this life. So here's the quote: "Money has power out of all proportion to its purchasing power. Because the children of this world understand this, they can use money for non-economic purposes, and use it they do. Money is used as a weapon to bully people and keep them in line. Money is used to buy prestige and honor. Money is used to enlist the allegiance of others. Money is used to corrupt people. Money is used for many things. It is one of the greatest powers in human society." And so really the gist of the lesson tonight is that it is so important for us to keep material things in perspective, like any other thing that may be benign in its own existence. Satan can often take these things and use them against us by encouraging us to have wayward attitudes toward them. So whether it's money specifically, or whether it's other material things in this life, I think we probably, with just a little bit of insight, can see the damaging effects that these things can have on us when our attitudes stray away from God. So, in the first major point of our outline tonight, we describe the human being as belonging to two worlds. By that, I mean that, number one, we are spiritual creatures. There is a soul or spirit inside of us that was made in the image of God, and it is our true essence. We are able to fellowship with or interact with God in our spirits, in our souls. It's the connection of our desires and our thoughts and things like love and appreciation for God and acknowledgement of Him as our creator. And so essentially, we are spiritual beings, and as such, we are connected with a spiritual world that is perceived only by faith. And so herein, we find really the most important part of our existence. It's that inner being that longs for an interaction with God on a spiritual basis. So that's one side of our being. However, in this particular phase of our existence, where we live here upon the earth, we're also physical beings. We're dual. We are spiritual beings, or a spiritual essence that resides in a material body for the present, which is also the shortest period of our existence. That is, our time here on the earth relative to eternity, where we will spend somewhere. This is the very, very slight or shortest part of our existence. Truly, we're here, as the New Testament says, like a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. And so our challenge is to live properly, that is, in a material world, but not lose sight of that which is spiritual. And hanging on to that spiritual awareness can be difficult, because it's something that must be comprehended with our mind and our thoughts. That is, it's not readily apparent to our senses. And so the temptation for us, being physical and earthly creatures surrounded by material things and material needs, is to let those predominate, to let the material, which is experienced by sight and smell and taste and touch, that these are the things that might dominate our thinking, because they're immediate, because they're obvious, because it really doesn't take any effort to perceive this material world through our senses. But it takes greater effort to keep in touch with the spiritual world, if you will, to keep in touch with God, and to keep being motivated by spiritual values. So let's think a little bit more under point 2 here. Let's think a little bit more about the necessities of life and our material connection with the world which God has made for us. And so we note here under point A that God has ordered human life in such a way that it requires much maintenance to function properly. That is, this material shell, or this house that our spirit resides in, this body and our place in this world requires a lot of maintenance, a lot of energy, a lot of time, and a lot of focus if we are to survive. Examples. Well, this body needs to be fueled properly, and it needs to do so at regular intervals. And so it's some animals we might read about, like a large boa, an anaconda, let's say. They can go months in between a large meal. And it is not so with a human being. We need not just daily, but several times a day. If we're being healthy, we need to furnish our bodies with the fuel that they need. And so that takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, even in a society where so much of our food is pre-packaged, prepared ahead of time, or processed. Even here, it takes a great amount of effort to perhaps have a job that creates an income that we can buy the food that we need, but it also takes time and preparation. And so there's a great investment merely in fueling this material body. Our climates, wherever we live on Earth, have some extremity to them. So even here in Virginia, we live in a fairly temperate sort of climate. We have 4 really distinct seasons. We're suffering through a hot one right now, but it's nice to have a home, perhaps that's got some climate control, air conditioning or fans, or the shade that we have in our home. But we also know that January is coming. It's right around the corner. Even though it's 6 months away, it's going to be here soon. And then we're going to have perhaps teens or single digits, or perhaps even some negative temperatures during January, February, snow on the ground. Again, we need shelter. We're fairly fragile beings, physically speaking. We need shelter. We need protection from the elements if our body is going to function properly. And we need clothing to come along with that is appropriate for the season we're going through. And so those are some basics, but based on the culture we live in, there may be all kinds of things that might be also considered necessities for our survival. Here in the United States, as has been observed by many social scientists, we have built a country that is very dependent on an automobile. We've lived in London, where the British, and that city particularly, but countrywide, they're very much more advanced in public transport than we are. But our country's larger. It was pretty much built, maybe somewhat at first on wagons and horses, but more so as our country's developed in the industrial age, we built our society around an automobile. And so here in the States, it's almost a necessity to have transportation, reliable ways to get around, to shop, and to get to work. And so here in a more advanced society, that may be a necessity. In other cultures, there may be other things besides automobiles that might be considered necessities as well. And so again, much time and effort is needed to provide ourselves materially with the ability to function in whatever culture it is that we may be living in. Now, here's the problem. It is very easy, if we're not careful, for these material things, even necessities of life, to change status. That is, we can bestow upon them more importance than merely just the necessity of fostering physical life. For example, we mentioned just briefly clothing, that we need to clothe our bodies appropriately, cooler, more flowing garments perhaps in the summertime, and heavier garments in the wintertime to ward off the cold. But what happens when clothing goes beyond a necessity for protecting our body, cooling it or heating it as the case may be, and it becomes a matter of fashion? When having the right label on your shirt or the right style becomes the most important thing. And so we can be so hung up in fashion that begins to affect our finances. It may be that we're no longer content to buy clothing that is adequate. It must be fashionable. It must be stylish. It must come from the right designer or manufacturer. And so if we're not careful, again, that which is a necessity can be taken too far, and it becomes a status symbol. Or it may be a matter of modesty. It may be that I'm more now so attuned with fashion that I will dress immodestly in order to be in step with everyone else. And again, the clothing that's designed to conceal parts of our body that don't need to be revealed and to protect us from the elements now has become a design feature, if you will, a status symbol and a matter of fashion that goes way beyond its element of necessity. Shelter, we mentioned that, is a necessity, but size and style and the accoutrements of our home, these things can come to dominate. Our home may no longer be shelter from the time of storm. It may be a status symbol as well. And so living in the right neighborhood and having a certain square footage or having the right architectural style, these things can come to define who we are as a human being. Food is a necessity again, but we can become enamored with it to the point of gluttony. We can abuse ourselves in other ways regarding our food. And so again, we've allowed something that is a necessity in order to function materially to be taken to another level that becomes harmful because now it's out of balance. We've lost our perspective on it. And so that leads to the next point, and that is, how do we define ourselves? And it's so important that we have balance in this regard, that we continue to define ourselves and to create our identity on a spiritual level rather than on a material or especially an external level by the clothes we're wearing or the car we're driving or the house we're living in. And so again, we might judge our importance, that I feel significant or I feel important because of some material consideration. My self-worth or success may come from the home I'm living in or the car I'm driving or what my annual income is or whether I'm climbing the corporate ladder and I have certain external indicators or markers of my success. And so these kinds of attitudes, when we begin to put more importance on material things than they deserve, these things throw us out of spiritual kilter. We lose our perspective. We're not any longer perhaps at peace. And we're probably chasing something in that regard that actually cannot be obtained. And so much of our anxiety in this life, I'm afraid, can be traced to material things that have gotten out of proportion in our thinking. And so that leads us to point 3, the top of our second page in our notes, and that is the necessity of keeping things in balance. And we have a lot of scriptural advice and guidance on this, but we can just say as an overarching point, God counsels us to keep material things in perspective, to not let them get out of whack or take on too much importance in our thinking, because our preoccupation with them actually stems from a distorted view of their importance. So for example, we've got several passages that we'll be reading in the next couple of sections of our lesson, but Proverbs 23 verses 4 and 5, if you'd like to follow there. Proverbs 23 verses 4 and 5. Do not overwork to be rich. Because of your own understanding, cease. Will you set your eyes on that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away like an eagle toward heaven. The proverb here is talking about the uncertainty of the material things of this life. And we're getting some lessons in that in this country right now, which is probably not entirely a bad thing. But we're undergoing severe economic trials connected with the coronavirus, the pandemic that we're dealing with and have been dealing with for at least four months. And so we're undergoing this great material stress, and it may be that it would be hoped that because of these trials and tribulations, that some people might be caused to reevaluate this constant search for material goods and heaping up for themselves the treasures of this world. They can be taken away so quickly. As the proverb says, they make themselves wings and fly away like an eagle. How picturesque that is. We just simply don't have a good grasp on the things of this world. Jesus says this in Matthew 6 and verse 20. He talks about material things decaying, moth and rust destroy, thieves break in and steal. And sadly, we're seeing even a lot more of that these days in our society as lawlessness becomes rampant in certain parts of the country. But, you know, we pretty much all live in a society where we're at least aware of, if we've not been victimized by theft. So we have cameras at our front doors. We have double and triple locks on the doors, all kinds of sensors around our house. We've got intercoms that we can, you know, speak words of warning to those who appear to be coming to our door with ill motives. We're very aware that thieves can break in and steal. We're very aware of the insecurity of these material things, yet so often they dominate our thinking, and we want to acquire more and more and more. Turn with me to 1 Timothy chapter 6. Paul has some very penetrating things to say here about material things. But in 1 Timothy 6, let's read verses 9 and 10. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. What a picturesque verse that is. It is so on point, especially in our society, which is essentially a wealthy one. Then verse 10 of 1 Timothy 6, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. The love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. That amplifies the passage that we started with in Foster's book at the beginning of the lesson. And so money can be used for all kinds of different illegitimate purposes. And it's not the money itself. This is often pointed out in this verse, and it's a legitimate point to be made. Money is not the root of all kinds of evil. Money is neutral. It is our inordinate love for it, our desire for it. It is greed. It is wanting more and more and more and not being satisfied with what we have that really ends up giving money this evil quality that's so often associated with it. Filthy lucre is the older King James term for this. And it does highlight the wickedness that so often comes with desiring more and more and more of the material things of this world. So it's the love of money that's a springboard for a multitude of evils. And then material things, we also learn, will not be a part of our eternal future. Sometimes we use the phrase, you know, you can't take it with you. Well, there's a couple of verses actually that make that aphorism very appropriate. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 7. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain that we can carry nothing out. Once again, the word of God can be so to the point, can it? And so expressive. We brought nothing into this world, and it's certain that we can carry nothing out. You can't take it with you. Again, also turn to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 5. Ecclesiastes, chapter 5. And Solomon says, as he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return, to go as he came. And he shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. And so this is helping us, I think, these ideas to keep things in balance. Everything that we accumulate in this life that's so important to us will be left to someone else. It may be someone that would be of our choosing that we might name in our will, and we intend for that to be a blessing, perhaps to our loved ones. So we're going to leave them with our accumulated things. But how often does that become a point of contention in a family? And the heirs fight over what has been left. Or if they do inherit it, perhaps the government gets a chunk of that, and then they will die, and then somebody else will get the inheritance that was left to them, and then they're going to leave it to someone else. And the book of Ecclesiastes talks about this in various places. But the bottom line is there's only so much that this accumulation of material things can do for us in life. These things are limited in what they can provide for us and any kind of happiness that they can give us or security. Material things are limited. And so we must be very, very careful that we don't let the instability of these things drive us crazy, because we end up chasing something we know we can't really hang on to. And so also turning in the New Testament to Matthew 19, Jesus has this interview. Man, if we put all the Gospels together, he's described as a rich young ruler, a man that's young. He's got his energy. He's got his life ahead of him. He's got his imagination probably in full fire for what may be for him in life because of his material things. So he is rich and he is young, and he's got some kind of political power, some kind of influence, a ruler of some undefined way. And so this man has an interaction with Jesus wherein he insists that he basically is a good person and has kept the major elements of the law, but yet he seems to sense that there's something missing. There's something more, and he's asking Jesus about this. What good thing shall I do that I may inherit eternal life? He asks in Matthew 19 and verse 16. So Jesus has this little back and forth with him in the ensuing verses. The young man, when he hears Jesus says in verse 20, all these things I have kept from my youth, what do I still lack? Well, Jesus puts his finger on it. If you want to be perfect, go and sell what you have and give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me. All those plans that young man may have thought about, all the power that he seemed to be deriving perhaps from his money, whether it's an inheritance or whether he earned it on his own, whether he's going on the family name and the influence his father built up. We don't really have all the details of that, but we do know this. He was so wrapped up in his money that even when Jesus said, and note carefully, Jesus didn't just tell him to go sell what he had and give it to the poor. He says, sell what you have, give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. It's not merely all out go. Jesus said, look, let go of these material things. And if you do, you'll have treasure in heaven. Come follow me. And this was not what the young man was prepared to hear. And I wonder if it's something that we would be prepared to hear. Are we willing to let go of some of the things of this life that may cause us the most trouble, may interfere most with our spiritual thinking? Are we clear enough in our thinking? Are we perceptive enough to let some of those material things go that may rule over us in order that we may have treasure in heaven? And so possessions can be spiritually binding. And that's one of the lessons that comes out of Jesus' encounter with this rich young man. Now, if you're looking at your notes, I want you to do a little editing, because I really didn't put this together very well. I ended up putting a point where I really wanted to be elsewhere. So in your notes, if you see in bold number 4, the antidote for materialism, and then look below that point A, 1 and 2. I want you to shift that up and make this the B point of item number 3 here. So just take what is in your notes, 4A, points 1 and 2, shift them up, and we'll make this point B of keeping things in balance. It really fits better there. I apologize for my bad arrangement of this lesson. So the second main point of keeping things in balance should be then, an overemphasis on material things leads to chronic anxiety and dissatisfaction. When we ask of material things what they're not able to give us, when we're looking at the things of this life that we're trying to achieve and accumulate and build up around us, when we ask them to give us calmness of spirit, we're going to get anxiety. When we ask those things to make us feel accomplished and successful, we're going to get dissatisfaction because they're not meant to be those things. This is such a major misthought in our lives. We sometimes ask certain things to do for us what they cannot do. No wonder we're frustrated. It's like taking a hammer and trying to saw a tree down. Well, the hammer isn't made to saw a tree down. It'll do a pretty good job of hammering a nail into a board, but it isn't a saw. And you're not going to get very far taking a saw and trying to hammer a nail into a board with it. I mean, it sounds so obvious, but yet in a more complicated way, this is what we so often do in life. We ask people, we ask things to do for us what they're not designed to do. And then we wonder why we get frustrated. Why am I not happy? Why am I not satisfied? Why am I not calm? Why am I not at peace? Well, because you're expecting something that you'll never get, because you're looking for it in the wrong place. The unstable nature of material things means that the covetous person will never have enough. For in the back of his mind, he always knows, I could lose these things. This is, again, the world we live in. The stock market, runs like a roller coaster. And we're all learning you can run out of toilet paper really quickly. You can run out of your favorite soft drink. Found out this week why you can't get Diet Cherry Coke, because we don't have enough aluminum cans anymore because of the cutback in manufacturing due to COVID. So they're saving the cans for the most popular drinks that sell, and that's not Diet Cherry Coke. So we're seeing in our society, in almost every nook and cranny, we're seeing shortages. We're seeing that things are not able to be produced like we're used to. And so we're living through the truth that the things that we often take for granted or we assume will be there may not be there. And so if we're basing our well-being on not only having these things, but accumulating them, always in the back of our minds, we're aware, I could lose all this. I could lose all this. So we're asking for peace from something that will never bring it. No amount of money or things will ever make our lives predictable, safe, and secure. Now, we can do the best we can. We can lock our front door. We can, check our camera to see who's at the door. We can carry insurance. We can do all kinds of things to try to make ourselves safe and secure. But the bottom line is that the life that we live here in this world is always going to have an element of risk, as we're finding out again with COVID. It's always going to have an element of uncertainty, and we need to learn to deal with that in the right way. And heaping up material things is not the way to do that. We will often waste our lives trying to maintain and maximize what can so easily slip through our fingers. So now let's make point 4 and the B part of that, let's make that A, because we moved the A section up. So the antidote for materialism, let's think about that. God counsels us to be content with what we have. That's really the ultimate antidote for greed or covetousness, the desire to want more or obtain or secure ourselves in some way with material things. No, God says that won't work, because essentially covetousness is an attitude. It's not about amounts of things. It's an attitude. And so here's what the Bible counsels us to do, and that's learn to be content with what we have, where we are in life. Nothing wrong with working and bettering ourselves educating ourselves, doing more sophisticated or difficult jobs. Part of that is just this spirit that we have to want to excel and accomplish and do better. All of that is fine in balance. But again, when we start looking at those things as our identity or our satisfaction or our success, then we're inviting discontentedness in. And that's going to give us problems. So 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 8, and having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. Well, there's an attitude check for us. Does that describe you? Does that describe me? If in the course of either COVID-19 or any other major societal or economic collapse, could we say, we who are so accustomed to having material things in abundance, can we say with food and clothing we would be content? I would say that's probably not the way most of us feel day in and day out. We want air conditioning when it's 98 degrees outside, and we would probably not be very content without it. I mean, there's some questions that we need to ask ourselves here regarding our deeper attitudes. How content would I be if I lived under very, very different conditions? I was watching a video earlier of a young lady from Somalia, and she's become a speaker here in the United States and travels to campuses. But she was speaking about her experience in Somalia growing up, and it was horrific. And I thought how blessed we are, how wonderful it is to be an American. And she was trying to convince us of that, so we won't throw it away, which some elements in our society seem intent on doing. But are we content? Now, we have a lot more than food and clothing, but would we be content with that if certainly that became our lot in life? Point number 2, set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. We've read that verse before in previous lessons, Colossians 3 and verse 2. Here's that dichotomy again between the physical and the spiritual. Set your mind on things above, not on things on this earth. Think about where Christ is. Think about where the Father is. Think about where the eternal part of our existence is going to be. That alone will help us keep things in proper perspective. Matthew 6, verses 31 and 32, therefore do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For after all these things the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. The Gentiles, those that are not believers in God, are on the treadmill. They're running the rat race, and they're trying to accumulate, and they're worried about what they'll eat or drink or what they shall wear, and not so much whether they'll wear anything, but is it the right thing to be wearing? And so Jesus says, don't worry about these things. God knows our needs. He's the creator. He created every living form on the face of this planet, and they all have their individual and very narrow needs. The needs of a crab in Chesapeake Bay are quite different than the needs of the hawks that fly outside my window every once in a while. Two completely different animals and completely different needs, and now multiply that by millions. And think about all the different kinds of life forms on this earth, including mankind. God knows exactly what each one needs. He is our creator. He's our maker. And we need to have confidence in him. Point number 4, not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned, both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's probably a well-known passage to us. It's Philippians 4, 11 and 12. But in that reading, think about what Paul says. I have learned, and that I think is the key. I have learned to be content, whatever state I am in. I think that is something we do need to learn. Maybe somebody's natural disposition is toward being satisfied with what they have. That's wonderful. That person may have a problem with ambition, not having it. Well, for most of us, though, I think contentment is something we need to learn. We need to practice. We need to make a conscious effort to make that part of our thinking, because we do especially in a materialistic society, have a drive to accumulate more and more. And so Paul says, I have learned. And then he says, I know how to be abased and I know how to abound. And certainly we see that in his life. He does without, he's in prison, he's living a hard life, traveling. I thought the other day, I try to walk most mornings during the week, and sometimes my feet and my knees hurt. And I actually literally was thinking about Paul walking in sandals. Not only did Paul walk so many of the places that he went over weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of traveling and up and down mountains and on very, very hard Roman roads, he did it in sandals. I think Paul literally beat his body to death over the course of time. And I think you could say, as he does in 2 Corinthians, look at my body. I bear the marks of Jesus. I think he also mentions that in Galatians 6. But he literally was displaying the wear and tear of living for Christ. He says, I know. I've been in both situations. I've had my needs abundantly met. I've been in prison. I know how to be abased. I know how to abound. I've learned in all things and everywhere how to be content, to be full and hungry, and so on and so forth. But he says that's all through Christ. I didn't learn it through Dave Ramsey. I didn't learn it through economic theories and consumer protocols. I didn't learn it through, investing early in my life, so I had my retirement nest egg. No, he says, I learned all this through Christ and the relationship that I have with him. And then back to Jesus in Matthew 6, verses 33 and 34, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. All the necessities, all the things that we need to survive will be added. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. Well, these verses and others we could consider stress our spiritual connection with heaven. Seek first the kingdom. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Seek those things that are above, not the things that are on the earth. When we take our eyes off of God and focus on the material, focus on this world, anxieties and frustrations will inevitably creep in because we're now focused on the wrong thing and it's unstable. We must learn to be content with God's endowments, for truly we do not own anything in this life. We sometimes joke about our house and say, yeah, I and the bank own my house. But, we know what we mean by that. But we don't own anything. We just are using it for a while. And what doesn't get passed on to somebody else may just deteriorate and blow away eventually. The beautiful new car with that new car smell that we all like is going to end up in the crusher one day. And that's just the way life is. We're only using things for a while. So again, if we put too much importance on them, we will be uneasy. We will be anxious and frustrated. While greed and covetousness grow in the vacuum of what one does not possess, thankfulness springs from an appreciation of what is possessed. And so contentedness and thankfulness go together. They are almost inseparable. For me to be thankful for what God has done for me and what God has provided for me is really the key to being content in this life. So there are various passages you see in your notes here on Thanksgiving. And I think for the consideration of our time tonight, I'll not read those. But if you don't have a lesson sheet, I'll mention them. Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7, 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 16 through 18, Colossians 2, verses 6 and 7, all dealing with the wonderful mindset of thanksgiving, being appreciative to God for what he's done. And so as we cultivate an awareness of and an appreciation for our spiritual blessings, our contentedness increases, even as our attachment to material things wanes. True happiness is not in material things. As we've said abundantly, you can't buy and store happiness through material things. That just simply cannot be done. True happiness springs from a heavenly attitude that puts material things in perspective. yea, even minimizes the importance of those things so that we're free from them. So we don't sit around wringing our hands each and every day on the material things of this world. Well, that's the outline for the evening. Let's briefly look at our questions. We only have 4 of them tonight. Number 1, how does our society encourage us to overemphasize material things? Well, lots of ways that we don't have time to discuss in detail. But the first one I wrote down was marketing. That is, our society is a consumer society. The economic engine of this country basically runs on us buying and using things. And so those that are making them are finding out ways to market them effectively to us, and they study us psychologically. And marketing is a very sophisticated thing. It's more than just packaging, putting a product in a nice, bright, shiny box. Marketers are studying human nature, and they're actually studying you as a person. A lot of what happens in this day and time with certain things that we fill out online and product, can't think of the word I want, but registering your product, registering your new TV, registering your phone, all these things that we do to give information, all of that information is traded around, and companies build profiles of you, not just of cross sections of society. They build a profile on you. And in fact, what's happening with many of us as we're actually getting sales and coupon papers in the mail specifically geared to our buying habits. I mean, these people are very sophisticated. And so marketing is aiming at you, telling you, you must buy this product to be happy. You need this product for your life to be fulfilled. And so that leads us to another one of my favorite phrases in advertising. Get the blank you deserve. Get the inheritance you deserve. Get the medicine you deserve. There is nothing today that isn't being sold without that line, I think. Get the product you deserve. Get the car you deserve. And that is just a play on pride and a sense that I am so important that I deserve that thing that maybe I can't afford or I don't really need, but I'm being told that because I'm so great, I deserve the best. So the point is, society is marketing things to us using insecurity, fears, all the security things that were being sold, using our pride, get the car you deserve, or prestige. It's not any car that you deserve. It's a Mercedes. It's not a Timex that you really need. It's a Rolex. It's not the community college you need to go to. It's Harvard. And especially you want to live in the right zip code. If you're anybody, you need to be in the right section of town, the right neighborhood. And there are some people literally that fight for certain zip codes in New York City or Los Angeles or other very prominent places. So our society is complicit in this. It is driving us because it's based on materialism. It's driving us to materialism. And we need to be wiser than that. We need to be smarter than that. We need to learn to see through the advertising, know ourselves well enough to know what can I afford and what do I need? What do I not need? Do I need to be on the cutting edge of all the latest technology? Do I need to be buying things I really can't afford? Do I need to be carrying this enormous debt on my credit card, carrying this balance that I can't afford to pay off because I am intent on buying things that I do not need because actually they've come to define me? They've come to be part of my identity. I mean, again, this can so easily get out of whack, and society is driving us toward this materialistic outlook. Question 2, how might we unwittingly pass on materialistic values to our children? Well, by fretting about all those material things, for one. The drive to have more, to work longer hours so we can go here and go there and buy this and buy that. Believe me, our children will see that and they'll be influenced by that. And so often this is why, as we've either seen in our family or we've heard about or read about, those that are younger today and just getting married, they want everything mom and dad have. They don't see it took mom and dad perhaps 30 or 40 years to build up the things that they've accumulated. And it's been a long, gradual rise in their lives to have some things that they have. And so it may be that we unwittingly communicate to our children how important these material things are to us, so they grow up having that same sense of importance. And it may be that we overbuy for our children. We give them too much because we can. And on some level, perhaps it makes us feel better. It may be parents that work a lot. Maybe both parents work and the children are in daycare. They feel guilty about that. So it's let me buy and buy and buy and give my children things because they're trying to work out their own guilt and their own lack of presence in their children's lives. Psychologically, again, material things can take way more precedence in our lives than they deserve. And it may be that happens because of deficiencies within us, that our priorities are out of whack. And now we're passing that on to our children. One of the worst examples of this in the upper echelons of society, this has been a story in the news for the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, the college admissions scandal. I'm sure most of us have heard about that. These ultra wealthy people making up false profiles about their children to get them into the prestigious schools, and they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars fraudulently to have their children accepted into these universities. What are they doing? They're teaching their children to be crooks and to value status and material things far more than they deserve in life. These people have passed on some of the absolute worst lessons to their children. And they did it because they're privileged and they think their children should be privileged. It's been a travesty to watch this unfold, a travesty on their children more than anything. What they have taught their children regarding values. And one of them, Lori Loughlin, is supposed to be a godly woman and has appeared in a lot of TV shows with a moral foundation to them. And she's been one of the worst offenders along with her husband. By the way, has pleaded guilty for actually doing this. Question number 3, discuss the implications of Luke 16 and verse 10. And then what can we learn from this statement? So Luke chapter 16 and verse 10, this comes in a context of the unjust steward that is being let go from his position by his master. He is no longer to be the steward in verse 2. And so he does some actually unscrupulous things to ingratiate himself with the debtors to his master's business. But it's the point I want to get to here in chapter 16 and verse 10, where Jesus says, he who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much, and he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. The point I'm getting at with this question is, sometimes we might find ourselves saying, well, you know, I would do more for people and I would do more to help in this situation or that if I only had more. If I had more of an abundance as it is, I really don't have that much. And so I can't really be of a lot of help. You know, what Jesus is saying is that we have a responsibility to be active in what we have for the Lord proportionally to what he's given to us. We've talked previously about the parable of the talents and those that are given different amounts commensurate with their abilities, 5 talents and 2 talents and 1 talent, and what the expectation of the master was on them and as to why he gave them what he did. And so the same principle holds true. Jesus does not ever hold us accountable for resources that we don't have, but he does hold us accountable for what we do have. And what he says is, if you have a little bit and you are responsible with that little that you have and you use it to help others or use it in service, you see these material things as a tool and not the end goal in themselves. He said, then if you have a lot, you would be faithful with a lot. You've demonstrated this with not having much. And I think sometimes we turn that around. We say, well, I don't have much, so I don't really do anything with it. But if I had more, I would do something with that. And Jesus said, no, that's not the way this works. If you're not faithful in a little bit, you're not going to be faithful with a lot. There'll always be reasons or excuses why we shouldn't do so-and-so with what we have. So this is kind of, again, a wake-up call for us in our attitude toward material things. What are we doing with what we have? Or because we don't have much, are we trying to conserve? Are we trying to store up and heap up so that if something happens, then we'll have enough on hand? And it's not wrong in and of itself to save. Some of our needs are not always today's needs. We are to have foresight. And we talked this morning in our morning lesson about wisdom. And wisdom looks down the road and projects some things that may happen, expenses that may come as our children age, for example, get older. But when we are derelict in what we ought to be doing because we say to ourselves, well, I don't really have a lot. The question is not how much do we have, it's what are we doing with what we have. So that's kind of where I was going with that. Whatever Jesus gives us, we must be faithful stewards of that. Then Malachi chapter 3, I'd like us to take a quick look at this passage. Malachi chapter 3, beginning in verse 8. This is part of the complaint of God against the post-exilic Israelites. They come back from captivity and they're not perhaps idolaters anymore, but they're not serving God as diligently as they should. And so before chapter 3, God's already indicted them on a number of things about their attitudes toward him and with what they have. So chapter 3 and verse 8, will a man rob God? God asks. Yet you have robbed me, but you say, in what way have we robbed you? And he answers, in tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation. And then here's the challenge God issues them in Malachi 3 and verse 10. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and prove me now in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it. What a challenge that is for all of us. The Israelites had the idea that they didn't want to give their tithes, which were intended to support the priesthood so they could be taught spiritual things. The challenge was, if you give to God what he has commanded you to give, he will then give back to you everything that you need. Every time in history, no matter what the covenant was, if God said, give me this, he guaranteed that giving him that specific thing would not lead to poverty, would not lead to destitution. God, again, doesn't ask of us what is designed to impoverish. God usually says something like this: if you give what I have said to give, I'll make sure that you get it back. Perhaps the Jubilee is another example of that in the Old Testament, where the Israelites were told not to sow their fields and to eat in that next year what was stored up from the previous year. And then the next year they would plant, but it wouldn't be until after that they would harvest. And so it's just one example of God saying, I'll provide for you. If you carry out my command and give what you should give, I will provide for you. I'll not make my commands so burdensome to you that by doing them, you're then going to be in a derelict situation. We have a similar passage to this in the New Testament in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. It goes along very well with this passage from Malachi. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 10 and 11. This is in the context, of course, of the Gentile collection that had been taken up from the churches of Galatia, Macedonia, Achaia, transported by Paul and other representatives from the churches to the brethren in Jerusalem. And so Paul says to the Corinthians, now may he, this is 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 10, now may he who supplies seed to the sower, that's God, and bread for food, supply and multiply the seed you have sown, and increase the fruits of your righteousness, while you are enriched in everything for all liberality, which causes thanksgiving through us to God. What a great passage that is. And it's basically saying, look, no matter what you sow, no matter what you have to invest in others, God can multiply that. God can multiply that and bring out of that what he wants. And is that not just a staple principle of the Bible? We see in so many different episodes of Scripture where men contributed very little, actually, to the outcome, but God made sure the outcome was sufficient. It was the outcome that he wanted. Brethren and friends, it never depends on us entirely. Yes, we have to be active and we have to be good stewards and we have to invest as God wants us to, but it never actually all rests on our shoulders. God says, look, do what I ask you to do and give what I ask you to give. I'll make it work. Because it really isn't about what we're giving. It's not about our resources. It's about God making it work anyway, but he wants a faithful response in us. He wants us to be generous. He wants us to be giving. He wants us to open our hand and say, okay, Lord, I will invest. I will give. I will help. I will supply. I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's really going to help. I don't think I got enough to make this work, but okay, I'll give what I have. And then God says, don't worry about that. Don't worry about the outcome. I'll make sure the outcome produces from the seed that you sow. I'll make sure that the bread produced will feed the multitudes. Even in a similar way, not miraculously, but as Jesus fed the multitudes with an inadequate amount of bread and fish, so when we feel like we're giving inadequately, God says, let me take care of the outcome. I'll make sure, and going back to the passage in Malachi, put me to the test, he says. Put me to the test. Ask of me and see if I won't open the windows of heaven. But you know, when we're filled with materialistic distractions, we're afraid. We're anxious. We want to hold on. We don't want to let go and let God have it because we're not quite sure that it's going to come back to us. So we need to free ourselves from that and learn the contentedness that Paul talked about. And that comes through thanksgiving, and that comes through an appreciation of what we have that comes from God. It really never is all about us, is it? I mean, we're to be faithfully cooperating with God, but it's never all about us. It really is about God. God is able to do through us, though we are very inadequate beings. Thank you for joining us tonight. We hope the study, it might have been a little painful to all of us being in a materialistic society and a wealthy society, but I hope it's helped us with our perspectives and our attitudes toward material things. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great week. We hope to see you soon.